Hello. Happy Wednesday. How is it going? Y'all? All y'all? I see Drepsnat again. I don't know why I find that name funny, but I do. I hope it's not offensive that I find the name funny. It is Wednesday, my dudes. March 8th. Sharkies! Oh, right. You've got the audition tonight. Ah. I feel bad that you're going to have to catch up later. Okay, I'm going to speed read the first page. I'll reread it later, but oh, this one's actually got a dedication. Dedicated to all those people, and why not, who, after the publication of Weird Sisters, deluged the author with their version of the words of the Hedgehog song. Dearie, dearie me. That's pretty great. With a little broomstick. Whoa. Went to our storage unit to get the book out of storage and picked up while we were there Feet of Clay and Jingo as well, just so we've got it in the future. Y'all. Okay. Sharky, I'm speed reading the first page for you, and then we'll read it normally later. This is the Discworld, which travels through space on the back of 4 elephants, which themselves stand on the shell of great Atuin, the sky turtle. Once upon a time, such a universe was considered unusual and possibly impossible. Possibly impossible. But then, it used to be so simple once upon a time. Because the universe was full of ignorance all around, and the scientist panned through it like a prospector crouched over a mountain stream, looking for the gold of knowledge among the gravel of unreason, the sand of uncertainty, and the little whiskery 8-legged swimming things of superstition. Occasionally, he would straighten up and say things like, "Hurrah! I've discovered Boyle's third law!" And everyone knew where they stood. But the trouble was that ignorance became more interesting. Oh boy. Especially big, fascinating ignorance about huge and important things like matter and creation. And people stopped patiently building their little houses of rational sticks in the chaos of the universe and started getting interested in the chaos itself. Partly because it was a lot easier to be an expert on chaos, but mostly because it made really good patterns that you could put on a t-shirt. There you go. First page. I hope you're hooked now. I like that it's taking shots at me. Like, that's one of those things where I feel like, people are ignorant and people enjoy being ignorant. Is one of those things where we're like, oh boy, does that feel relevant right now? Oh, I can think of 300 examples of how that's relevant right now. And that's how it always has been and always will be. Like, if you, this book wasn't just written. This was from, when's the first publication of this? 1991, I think? Which sounds like, 1991, oh, that was just 10 years ago or whatever. Newsflash. Slightly longer than that. Surprise, surprise. I am apparently old enough that I say newsflash. I don't think that's a thing anymore. Look at that guy. He wants a piece of a rice cake. I I am sure that if you took this book back in time to, you know, 1770, people would not understand the colloquialisms, but they would go, ah, yes, people do enjoy being ignorant. Why, I can think of 300 examples. It's the thing about only being alive for a few decades. We don't remember that a lot of these problems come around again and again. Yeah. Well, Mr. Sharkey, break a leg, or whatever is the appropriate thing to say when you are going for an audition. I will not say the words that start with G and L because I don't know if those are bad luck to say when it comes to auditions. Yeah. I hope you get the part immediately and then can hurry back to rejoin us for the reading. Or I hope that it takes a little while and then you get the part and you can just ignore what we're doing here. I'm getting to that age where you can actually remember some of those cycles. Cycles. Everything's cyclical. If you watched 30 Rock, technology's cyclical. Pagers will come back. Fashions that have come back. Yeah, there have been some sightings of, I think, early 2000s fashions making a reappearance. Only pieces, not a lot of 30 Rock. Not all of 30 Rock has aged ultra well. But it's still, I don't know. There are some genius moments in that show. And some, especially, it's one of those ones where it's like, the first season is okay. It's got funny moments. You need to watch it to kind of get the idea of what's going on. I guess you don't need to. But as it goes on, the show has some really great moments. Ultra low rise jeans. Ba, 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 ba. I don't mean to alarm anybody, but I spy with my little eye BBAB in the user list. The user list? The viewer list? It says users, but users is weird. They say the user lives outside the net and inputs games for pleasure. No one knows for sure, but I intend to find out. Reboot. You are Alaramed. Alaramed. Ring the alarm bell. Speaking of things from the past, yeah. Yesterday I was getting kind of an urge to rewatch Tron and Tron Legacy. Partly just for the music. But Sleet, you say. Why not just listen to the soundtracks? I also enjoy the movies. And it's been I don't think I've actually watched... Maybe I've watched Tron Legacy twice, but maybe just once. I feel like maybe I've watched it a second time. I enjoyed that. One of your favorite YouTubers did a video not long ago about the atrocities of fashion 20 years ago and its vendetta against pockets in women's clothing, and by proxy, women's bodies. Vaguely kind of sounds, the way that sentence is phrased, I don't know, something slightly off. Oh, crick. The tagline on the cover says, "Three witches make the godmother an offer she can't refuse." So it focuses on like my fingers instead of the letters. Not the typical Kirby artwork on my copy, sadly, the Josh Kirby artwork, which is unfortunate. It's just got this picture here. Sadly, some cats on the side. Unlike Feet of Clay, next time we get to the Guard series, this is what you got to look forward to. I like that book. I mean, I like all of them. And I have read Feet of Clay a few more times, so I am looking forward to reading Witches Abroad for, I think, only my second time. So there's going to be... I've mentioned this before, but I remember some specific scenes, but not any details at all. I've got a pretty new copy. And it has the... Oh, yeah. I've seen... I think we ran into that on a previous book as well, didn't we? It has the Kirby artwork, but in a different layout. It seems like... I don't know. It seems like such a shame to publish the books at all without the Josh Kirby artwork. Men at Arms, yeah, that was the one. Just like... It's there, it's incredible and iconic, and you choose not to use it because, what, I don't know, maybe you're afraid that you won't pull in a mature enough audience or something. Like, you think you're going to get new people buying the book that don't know what they're getting into by, like, not having that art on the cover? Yeah, that was when we were considering how to get a hold of the book for tonight. You know, we also thought about going to a used bookstore, but then the issue came up of people just kind of hold on to these books and they don't often end up in used bookstores. Maybe they don't have the rights to it anymore. I suspect it's a style decision. That would be my guess. I guess that could be a thing. Definitely seems a style thing. I posted around in a few places. Not anywhere. BBAB! Hey! Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. I've never actually watched that show. I think that's Welcome Back, Kotter, right? Probably. Yeah, I mean, we missed you, but I thought specifically that you seemed like you enjoyed the previous witch book, and we haven't read another witch's book since then. So tonight we're going to be starting Witches Abroad, which is going to be a lot of fun. Yeah, as I was saying before, I've only read this book once before myself, and that was quite a long time ago, so it's going to be very nearly a fresh read for me. A fresh read? A weird thing to say. Yeah, I posted around a couple of places to see if I could pull in anybody new, maybe, but I don't know if that's going to work or not. I do love you a good witchy book. And this is the sequel to whatever the previous one was, Weird Sisters. You're still working. I don't think that I could help because I do not have any training in that particular area. I sent help in the form of, look at this cute puppy. Look at how little he is. He's only this. Oh, he's getting bigger. Ah! Look at this cute puppy.
Look at him. Oh, squishing his face. Squish. 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 Squish, squish, squish.
You dance with them. Dance, dance, dance. Dance, dance, dance. Dance, dance. Dance, 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 dance. Dance, 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 dance. Did not get that much bigger. He grew like one of those dinosaur sponges that you drop in water. Boop. Yeah. Okay. I think it's about time to start a new book. What do all y'all think? Usually goes towards clapping. Yeah, but he gets nervous when I'm in this chair. I think he's afraid I'm gonna scoop him up. Because I would, if you weren't afraid of it. Yay, new book day! You have snacks and the book and you're ready. All right. Well, then, I'm going to reread that first page. It's a good first page. I feel like Sir Terry's got a real talent for starting a book. Forget, really, I don't know, catching you on the first page. That first page hook. I feel like we've seen that in basically every one of the books that we've read. All right, all right, all right. Here we go. Page 1. I appreciate that it actually starts on page 1 in my copy, not like page 7 or whatever, because it's decided to count every piece of paper in the book, even if they're not part of the story. So yes, originally published, I believe, in 1991. Here we go. This is the Discworld, which travels through space on the back of 4 elephants, which themselves stand on the shell of Great Atuin, the sky turtle. Once upon a time, such a universe was considered unusual, and possibly impossible. But then, it used to be so simple once upon a time, because the universe was full of ignorance all around, and the scientist panned through it like a prospector crouched over a mountain stream, looking for the gold of knowledge among the gravel of unreason, the sand of uncertainty, and the little whiskery 8-legged swimming things of superstition. Occasionally, he would straighten up and say things like, "Hurrah! I've discovered Boyle's third law," and everyone knew where they stood. But the trouble was that ignorance became more interesting. Nice. Being able to borrow ebooks from the library is just, that's the kind of future that I am on board for. That's the sort of direction I'd like to see society move in. But the trouble was that ignorance became more interesting, especially big, fascinating ignorance about huge and important things, like matter and creation. And people stopped patiently building their little houses of rational sticks in the chaos of the universe, and started getting interested in the chaos itself. Partly because it was a lot easier to be an expert on chaos, but mostly because it made really good patterns that you could put on a t-shirt. And instead of getting on with proper science, footnote, scientists suddenly went around saying how impossible it was to know anything, and that there wasn't really anything you could call reality to know anything about, and how all this was tremendously exciting, and incidentally, did you know there were possibly all these little universes all over the place, but no one can see them because they're all curved in on themselves? Incidentally, don't you think this is a rather good t-shirt? Footnote. Proper science. Like finding that bloody butterfly whose flapping wings cause all these storms we've been having lately, and getting it to stop. End of footnote. Butterfly? This has felt a little more rant-like than the typical opening to one of the Discworld books. I feel like I could get into a really good rant mode here, just start ramping up. I gotta rein myself back to stop from doing that. Shakes fist at butterfly. Sir Terry shakes his fist. Butterfly! Bring it back down. Compared to all this, a large turtle with a world on its back is practically mundane. At least it doesn't pretend it doesn't exist, and no one on the Discworld ever tried to prove it didn't exist, in case they turned out to be right, and found themselves suddenly floating in empty space. This is because the Discworld exists right on the edge of reality. The least little things can break through to the other side. So, on the Discworld, people take things seriously. Like stories. Because stories are important. People think that stories are shaped by people. In fact, it's the other way around. Stories exist independently of their players. If you know that, the knowledge is power. Stories, great flapping ribbons of shaped space-time, have been blowing and uncoiling around the universe since the beginning of time. And they have evolved. The weakest have died and the strongest have survived, and they have grown fat on the retelling. Stories, twisting and blowing through the darkness. And their very existence overlays a faint but insistent pattern on the chaos that is history. Stories etch grooves deep enough for people to follow in the same way that water follows certain paths down a mountainside. And every time fresh actors tread the path of their story, the groove runs deeper. This is called the theory of narrative causality, and it means that a story, once started, takes a shape. It picks up all the vibrations of all the other workings of that story that have ever been. This is why history keeps on repeating all the time. We were just talking about cycles. This is why history keeps on repeating all the time. Ooh. He got us. He got us, everyone. He ate the rice cake and now he's just giving my hand a lick. So, 1,000 heroes have stolen fire from the gods. 1,000 wolves have eaten grandmother. 1,000 princesses have been kissed. 1,000,000 unknowing actors have moved, unknowing, through the pathways of story. It is now impossible for the third and youngest son of any king, if he should embark on a quest which has so far claimed his older brothers, not to succeed. Give me that over-the-shoulder look.
Oh, scratch.
What? I'm going to reread that bit. Hey. What are you doing? What?
Back.
It is now impossible for the third and youngest son of any king, if he should embark on a quest which has so far claimed his older brothers, not to succeed. Stories don't care who takes part in them. All that matters is that the story gets told, that the story repeats. Or, if you prefer to think of it like this, stories are a parasitical life form, warping the lives in the service only of the story itself. Footnote. And people are wrong about urban myths. Logic and reason say that these are fictional creations, retold again and again by people who are hungry for evidence of weird coincidence, natural justice, and so on. They aren't. They keep on happening all the time, everywhere, as the stories bounce back and forth across the universe. At any one time, hundreds of dead grandmothers are being whisked away on the roof racks of stolen cars, and loyal Alsatians are choking on the fingers of midnight burglars. And they're not confined to any one world. Hundreds of female Mercurian jivts turn 4 tiny eyes on their rescuers and say, "My brood husband will be livid. It was his travel module." Urban myths are alive. End of footnote. It's the first footnote I can recall that has spanned more than one page. Oh, that was Kingdoms of Amalur. That was Kingdoms of Amalur. Yeah. Where it was like the Fae would live out stories, and then you, like, if you got yourself involved in that story, then you had to play a part in it. Yeah, that was very much this. Almost as literal as this, I would say. Alright. It takes a special kind of person to fight back and become the bicarbonate of history. Once upon a time, the bicarbonate of history. Become the bicarbonate of history. Yeah! There's a goal. Reactive? I don't know. I don't understand that one. If anyone feels like explaining how bicarbonate. But this is, you don't want to be a carbon copy, right? This is saying it takes a special kind of person to fight back, like against stories. Like, oh, like the original that gets copied? Maybe. Alright. Once upon a time. ... Gray hands gripped the hammer and swung it, striking the post so hard that it sank a foot into the soft earth. 2 more blows and it was fixed immovably. From the trees around the clearing, the snakes and birds watched silently. In the swamp, the alligators drifted like patches of badass water. What? The alligators drifted like patches of bad-assed water. A-S-S-E-D, assed. Gray hands took up the crosspiece and fixed it in place, tying it with creepers, pulling them so tight that they creaked. She watched him. And then she took up a fragment of mirror and tied it to the top of the post. The coat, she said. I don't know who she is, so I don't know what voice is appropriate yet. Maybe this is a different person and that voice is wrong. He took up the coat and fitted it over the crosspiece. I'm going to need to remember everyone's voices. I can remember Nanny Ogg's and maybe Granny's, but I'm not sure if I can remember, what's her name? Magrat, yeah. He took up the coat and fitted it over the crosspiece. The pole wasn't long enough, so that the last few inches of sleeve draped emptily. And the hat, she said. It was tall, and round, and black. It glistened. The piece of mirror gleamed between the darkness of the hat and the coat. "Will it work?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Even mirrors have their reflection. We got to... oh... I think I'm doing the wrong voice here. I think this should be an older voice. I think this should be more like, "Yes." No, she said. "Even mirrors have their..." No, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing here. I might need to go back and listen to myself do one of the earlier... I've completely forgotten some of these voices. Give me a second. I'm gonna pull up one of the previous streams and listen to myself read a character. Whoa. I need to mute this though. There, that should do it. Let's see. Content. Let's go back to a playlist. This one, Weird Sisters. Let's pick, let's say like episode 9. Jump partway through.
Building a particular Weird Sisters by after getting costs in 140. So, why don't we get into it? The storm was resting. This one. I remember a hazy hour. Hat in a hamburger hell.
Sorry, everyone.
Gone, said Granny Weatherwax.
Oh.
Or maybe, recognized them as old friends and connoisseurs, and conjured up a brief unseasonal roll of thunder as a form of greeting. This was totally ignored. "The bloody stone's gone," said Granny Weatherwax. "He's at the full moon," Weatherwax. The corridor.
Alright. I think I just kind of went gruff. Because I'm guessing this is Granny Weatherwax here. I don't know for sure. So let's see.
"Yes," she said. "Even mirrors have their reflection. We got to fight mirrors with mirrors."
About there, right? You actually don't think it is Granny? Well, based on the phrasing, I'm going to say it's someone that sounds similar to Granny. She glared up through the trees to a slim white tower in the distance.
"We've got to find her reflection." "It'll have to reach out a long way then." "Yes. We need all the help we can get."
Yeah, it's probably not actually Granny. She looked around the clearing. She had called upon Mr. Safeway, Lady Bon Anna, Hotaloga Andrews, and Stride Wide Man. They probably weren't very good gods. But they were the best she'd been able to make. Mr. Safeway, Lady Bon Anna. I'm assuming that's supposed to sound like banana. Hotaloga Andrews. Hotaloga Andrews. Hotaloga Andrews. I don't know what that... Yeah. Anyway. There's a paragraph gap there. This is a story about stories. Or what it really means to be a fairy godmother. But it's also, particularly, about reflections and mirrors. All across the multiverse there are backward tribes, footnote, who distrust mirrors and images because, they say, they steal a bit of a person's soul, and there's only so much of a person to go around. So, footnote. Considered backward, that is, by people who wear more clothes than they do. End of footnote. And the people who wear more clothes say this is just superstition, despite the fact that other people who spend their lives appearing in images of one sort or another seem to develop a thin quality. It's put down to overwork, and, tellingly, overexposure instead. Just superstition. But a superstition doesn't have to be wrong. A mirror can suck up a piece of soul. A mirror can contain the reflection of the whole universe. A whole sky full of stars in a piece of silvered glass no thicker than a breath. Know about mirrors, and you nearly know everything. Look into the mirror. Further. To an orange light on a cold mountaintop, thousands of miles from the vegetable warmth of that swamp. Local people called it the Bear Mountain, B-E-A-R. This was because it was a bare mountain, B-A-R-E, not because it had a lot of bears on it, B-E-A-R-S. This caused a certain amount of profitable confusion, though. People often strode into the nearest village with heavy-duty crossbows, traps and nets, and called haughtily for native guides to lead them to the bears. Since everyone locally was making quite a good living out of this, what with the sale of guidebooks, maps of bear caves, ornamental cuckoo clocks with bears on them, bear walking sticks, and cakes baked into the shape of a bear. Somehow, no one had time to go and correct the spelling. Footnote. The footnote is, bad spelling can be lethal. For example, the greedy seraph of Al-Yabi was once cursed by a badly educated deity, and for some days everything he touched turned to Glod, which happened to be the name of a small dwarf from a mountain community hundreds of miles away, who found himself magically dragged to the kingdom and relentlessly duplicated. Some 2,000 Glods later, the spell wore off. These days, the people of Al-Yabi are renowned for being unusually short and bad-tempered. End of footnote. Everything he touched turned to Glod. Alright, so somehow no one had time to go and correct the spelling. Poor Glod. It was about as bare, B-A-R-E, as a mountain could be. Most of the trees gave out about halfway to the top, only a few pines hanging on to give an effect very similar to the couple of pathetic strands teased across his scalp by a baldy who won't own up. A baldy. It was a place where witches met. I was going to give him a second to finish his extended drink. Oh, good puppy. Comb over mountain. Bear mountain. Tonight, a fire gleamed on the very crest of the hill. Dark figures moved in the flickering light. The moon coasted across a lacework of clouds. Finally, a tall, pointy-hatted figure said,
"You mean everyone brought potato salad?"
I'm going to have to get back into the groove of that voice. That's no good. There was one Ramtop witch who was not attending the Sabbat. I don't know if I know how to pronounce that word. Witches like a night out as much as anyone else, but, in this case, she had a more pressing appointment. And it wasn't the kind of appointment you can put off easily. Desiderata Hollow was making her will. When Desiderata Hollow was a girl, her grandmother had given her 4 important pieces of advice to guide her young footsteps on the unexpectedly twisting pathway of life. They were: never trust a dog with orange eyebrows, always get the young man's name and address, never get between 2 mirrors, and always wear completely clean underwear every day, because you never knew when you were going to be knocked down and killed by a runaway horse, and if people found you had unsatisfactory underwear on, you'd die of shame. And then Desiderata grew up to become a witch. And one of the minor benefits of being a witch is that you know exactly when you're going to die, and can wear what underwear you like. Footnote, which explains a lot about witches. End of footnote. That had been 80 years earlier, when the idea of knowing exactly when you were going to die had seemed quite attractive because, secretly, of course, you knew you were going to live forever. That was then. And this was now. Forever didn't seem to last as long these days as once it did. Another log crumbled to ash in the fireplace. Desiderata hadn't bothered to order any fuel for the winter. Not much point, really. And then, of course, there was this other thing. She'd wrapped it up carefully into a long, slim package. Now, she folded up the letter, addressed it, and pushed it under the string. Job done. She looked up. Desiderata had been blind for 30 years, but this hadn't been a problem. She'd always been blessed, if that was the word, with second sight. So, when the ordinary eyes gave out, you just trained yourself to see into the present, which anyway was easier than the future. And, since the eyeball of the occult didn't depend on light, you saved on candles. There was always a silver lining if you knew where to look, in a manner of speaking. There was a mirror on the wall in front of her. The face in it was not her own, which was round and pink. It was the face of a woman who was used to giving orders. Desiderata wasn't the sort to give orders. Quite the reverse, in fact. The woman said, "You are dying, Desiderata."
"I am that too."
"You've grown old. Your sort always do. Your power is nearly gone."
"That's a fact, Lilith,"
said Desiderata mildly. "So, your protection is withdrawing from her."
"'Fraid so,"
said Desiderata. "So now it's just me and the evil swamp woman. And I will win."
"That's how it seems, I'm afraid."
"You should have found a successor."
"Never had the time. I'm not the planning sort, you know."
The face in the mirror got closer, as if the figure had moved a little nearer to its side of the mirror. "You've lost, Desiderata Hollow."
"So it goes."
Desiderata got to her feet, a little unsteadily, and picked up a cloth. The figure seemed to be getting angry. It clearly felt that people who had lost ought to look downcast, and not as if they were enjoying a joke at your expense. "Don't you understand what losing means?"
"Some people are very clear about that," said Desiderata. "Goodbye, my lady."
She hung the cloth over the mirror. There was an angry intake of breath, and then silence. Desiderata stood as if lost in thought. Then she raised her head and said,
"Kettle boiled just now. Would you like a cup of tea?"
"No, thank you," said a voice right behind her.
"How long have you been waiting?"
"Forever."
"Not keeping you, am I?"
"It's a quiet night."
"I'm making a cup of tea. I think there's one biscuit left."
"No, thank you."
"If you feel peckish, it's in the jar on the mantelpiece. That's genuine Clatchian pottery, you know. Made by a genuine Clatchian craftsman. From Clatch," she added.
"Indeed?"
I used to get about a lot in my younger days.
Yes.
Great times. Desiderata poked the fire. It was the job, you see. Of course, I expect it's very much the same for you.
Yes.
I never knew when I was going to be called out. Well, of course you'd know about that, wouldn't you? Kitchens, mainly. It always seemed to be kitchens. Balls, sometimes, but generally it was kitchens.
She picked up the kettle and poured the boiling water into the teapot on the hearth. Indeed.
I used to grant their wishes.
Death looked puzzled. What? You mean like fitted cupboards? New sinks? That kind of thing?
No, no. The people, Desiderata sighed. It's a big responsibility, fairy godmothering. Knowing when to stop, I mean. People whose wishes get granted often don't turn out to be very nice people. So, should you give them what they want, or what they need?
Death nodded politely. From his point of view, people got what they were given.
Like this Genua thing,
Desiderata began. I think Genua, right? Genua? I think Genua kind of like Geneva. Death looked up sharply. Genua?
You know it? Well, of course you would.
I know everywhere, of course. Or Genua, could be. Desiderata's expression softened. Her inner eyes were looking elsewhere.
There were two of us. Godmothers go in twos, you know. Me and Lady Lilith. There's a lot of power in godmothering. It's like being part of history. Anyway, the girl was born, out of wedlock, but none the worse for that. It wasn't as if they couldn't have married, they just never got around to it. And Lilith wished for her to have beauty and power and marry a prince. Ha! And she's been working on that ever since. What could I do? You can't argue with wishes like that. Lilith knows the power of a story. I've done the best I could, but Lilith's got the power. I hear she runs the city now, changing a whole country just to make a story work. And it's too late anyway. For me. So, I'm handing on the responsibility. That's how it goes with fairy godmothering. No one ever wants to be a fairy godmother. Except Lilith, of course. Got a bee in her bonnet about it. So I'm sending someone else. I may have left things too late.
Desiderata was a kindly soul. Fairy godmothers develop a very deep understanding about human nature, which makes the good ones kind and the bad ones powerful. She was not someone to use extreme language, but it was possible to be sure that when she deployed a mild term like a bee in her bonnet, she was using it to define someone whom she believed to be several miles over the madness horizon and accelerating. She poured out the tea.
That's the trouble with second sight, she said. You can see what's happening, but you don't know what it means. I've seen the future. There's a coach made out of a pumpkin, and that's impossible. And there's coachmen made out of mice, which is unlikely. And there's a clock striking midnight, and something about a glass slipper. And it's all going to happen, because that's how stories have to work. And then I thought, I know some people who make stories work their way. She sighed again. Wish I was going to Genua, she said. I could do with the warmth. And it's Fat Tuesday coming up. Always went to Genua for Fat Tuesday in the old days. There was an expectant silence. Then Death said,
You surely are not asking me to grant a wish.
Ha! No one grants a fairy godmother's wishes. Desiderata had that inward look again, her voice talking to herself. Ah, bedtime! Curse you, bedtime and butterflies! No worries. Hopefully we'll see you again soon, BBAB. I'll be back here on Friday, assuming nothing gets in the way. Have a good night and sleep well. Say hi to the kitties. Desiderata had that inward look again, her voice talking to herself. See? I got to get the 3 of them to Genua. Got to get 'em there because I've seen 'em there. Got to be all 3. And that ain't easy with people like them. Yeah, we missed you too. And that ain't easy with people like them. Got to use headology. Got to make 'em send 'emselves. Tell Esme Weatherwax she's got to go somewhere, and she won't go out of contrariness. So, tell her she's not to go, and she'll run there over broken glass. That's the thing about the Weatherwaxes, see? They don't know how to be beaten. Something seemed to strike her as funny. But one of 'em's going to have to learn. Death said nothing. From where he sat, Desiderata reflected. From where he sat, Desiderata reflected, losing was something that everyone learned. She drained her tea. Then she stood up, put on her pointy hat with a certain amount of ceremony, and hobbled out of the back door. There was a deep trench dug under the trees a little way from the house, down into which someone had thoughtfully put a short ladder. She climbed in and, with some difficulty, heaved the ladder onto the leaves. Then she lay down. She sat up. Mr. Chert, the troll down at the sawmill, does a very good deal on coffins, if you don't mind pine.
I shall definitely bear it in mind.
I got Herker the poacher to dig the hole out for me, she said conversationally. And he's going to come along and fill it in on his way home. I believe in being neat. Take it away, maestro!
What? Oh, a figure of speech.
He raised his scythe. Desiderata Hollow went to her rest. Well, she said, that was easy. What happens now? And this is Genua, the magical kingdom, the diamond city, the fortunate country. In the center of the city, a woman stood between 2 mirrors, watching herself reflected all the way to infinity. The mirrors were themselves in the center of an octagon of mirrors, open to the sky on the highest tower of the palace. There were so many reflections, in fact, that it was only with extreme difficulty that you could tell where the mirrors ended
and the real person began. You've done that before? What, stood in the center of a bunch of mirrors? Don't do that. That was one of the rules. Never get between two mirrors. Right up there with never trust a dog with orange eyebrows. There's only 4 rules. You've broken one of them. Her name was Lady Lilith de Tempshire. Tempshire? Tempscire. Could be Tempshire. You tempt fate. She Tempshire. Oh, oh. I don't know what that face I just made was. You heard me pick up my mug? Oh, you slipped. You slipped. Her name was Lady Lilith de Tempshire, although she had answered to many others in the course of a long and eventful life. And that was something you learned to do early on, she'd found. If you wanted to get anywhere in this world, and she'd decided right at the start that she wanted to get as far as it was possible to go, you wore names lightly, and you took power anywhere you found it. She had buried 3 husbands, and at least 2 of them had been already dead. And you moved around a lot, because most people didn't move around much. Change countries and your name, and, if you had the right manner, the world was your mollusk. For example, she'd had to go a mere 100 miles to become a lady. She'd go to any lengths now. The 2 main mirrors were set almost, but not quite, facing one another, so that Lilith could see over her shoulder and watch her images curve away around the universe inside the mirror. She could feel herself pouring into herself, multiplying itself via the endless reflections. When Lilith sighed and strode out from the space between the mirrors, the effect was startling. Images of Lilith hung in the air behind her for a moment, like 3-dimensional shadows, before fading. So, Desiderata was dying. Interfering old baggage. She deserved death. She'd never understood the kind of power she'd had. She was one of those people afraid to do good for fear of doing harm, who took it all so seriously that they'd constipate themselves with moral anguish before granting the wish of a single ant. Lilith looked down and out over the city. Well, there were no barriers now. The stupid voodoo woman in the swamp was a mere distraction, with no understanding. Nothing stood in the way of what Lilith liked more than anything else: a happy ending. Up on the mountain, the Sabbat had settled down a bit. Artists and writers have always had a rather exaggerated idea about what goes on at a witch's Sabbat. This comes from spending too much time in small rooms with the curtains drawn, instead of getting out in the healthy fresh air. For example, there's the dancing around naked. In the average temperate climate, there are very few nights when anyone would dance around at midnight with no clothes on, quite apart from the question of stones, thistles, and sudden hedgehogs. Sudden hedgehogs. Then there's all that business with goat-headed gods. Most witches don't believe in gods. They know that the gods exist, of course. They even deal with them occasionally. But they don't believe in them. They know them too well. It would be like believing in the postman. And then, and there's the food and drink. The bits of reptile and so on. In fact, witches don't go for that sort of thing. The worst you can say about the eating habits of the older type of witch is that they tend to like ginger biscuits dipped in tea with so much sugar in it that the spoon won't move, and will drink it out of the saucer if they think it's too hot. And do so with appreciative noises more generally associated with the cheaper type of plumbing system. Legs of toad and so on might be better than this. Then there's the mystic ointments. By sheer luck, the artists and writers are on firmer ground here. Most witches are elderly, which is when ointments start to have an attraction. And at least 2 of those present tonight were wearing Granny Weatherwax's famous goose grease and sage chest liniment. Goose grease and sage. This didn't make you fly and see visions, but it did prevent colds, if only because the distressing smell that developed around about the 2nd week kept everyone else so far away you couldn't catch anything from them. Oh, wow. And finally, there's sabbats themselves. Your average witch is not, by nature, a social animal as far as other witches are concerned. There's a conflict of dominant personalities. There's a group of ringleaders without a ring. There's the basic unwritten rule of witchcraft, which is, don't do what you will, do what I say. The natural size of a coven is 1. Witches only get together when they can't avoid it. Like now. The conversation, given Desiderata's absence, had naturally turned to the increasing shortage of witches. Footnote. The footnote reads, Desiderata had sent a note via Old Mother Dismas asking to be excused on account of being dead. Second Sight enables you to keep a very tight rein on your social engagements. End of footnote.
What? No one?
Said Granny Weatherwax.
No one,
said Gammer Brevis. Gammer Brevis.
I call that terrible,
said Granny.
That's disgusting. Eh?
Said Old Mother Dismas. I guess there's at least 3 of them there.
Eh?
Said Old Mother Dismas.
She calls it disgusting,
shouted Gammer Brevis.
Eh? There's no girl to put forward to take Desiderata's place. Oh.
The implications of this sank in.
If anyone doesn't want their crust, I'll have 'em,
said Nanny Og. That's the one I can remember how to do.
We never had this sort of thing in my young days,
said Granny.
There was a dozen witches this side of the mountain alone. Of course, that was before all this.
She made a face.
making your own entertainment. There's far too much of this making your own entertainment these days. We never made our own entertainment when I was a girl. We never had time.
Temper's fugget, said Nanny Ogg.
What?
Temper's fugget. Means that was then and this is now, said Nanny.
I don't need no one to tell me that, Githa Og. I know when now is.
You got to move with the times.
I don't see why. Don't see why we.
So I reckon we got to shift the boundaries again, said Gammer Brevis.
Can't do that,
said Granny Weatherwax promptly.
I'm doing 4 villages already. The broomstick hardly has time to cool down.
Well, with Mother Hollow passing on, we're definitely short-handed, said Gammer Brevis.
I know she didn't do a lot, what with her other work, but she was there.
I don't know what voice I'm doing with Gammer Brevis.
That's what it's all about, being there. There's got to be a local witch.
The 4 witches stared gloomily at the fire. Well, 3 of them did. Nanny Ogg, who tended to look on the cheerful side, made toast.
They've got a wizard down in Creel Springs, said Gammer Brevis. There wasn't anyone to take over when old Granny Hopless passed on, so they sent off to Ankh-Morpork for a wizard. An actual wizard! With a staff! He's got a shop there and everything, with a brass sign on the door. It says, Wizard.
The witches sighed.
Mrs. Singh passed on,
said Gammer Brevis.
And Gammer Peavy passed on. Did she? Old Mabel Peavy?
Said Nanny Ogg, through a shower of crumbs.
How old was she? 119, said Gammer Brevis. I said to her, you don't want to go climbing mountains at your age, but she wouldn't listen.
Some people are like that,
said Granny.
Stubborn as mules. Tell them they mustn't do something and they won't stop till they've tried it.
I actually heard her very last words, said Gammer.
What did she say?
Said Granny.
As I recall, oh, bugger, said Gammer. It's the way she would have wanted to go, said Nanny Ogg.
The other witches nodded.
You know, we could be looking at the end of witchcraft in these parts,
said Gammer Brevis. They stared at the fire again.
I don't expect anyone's brought any marshmallows,
said Nanny Ogg, hopefully. Granny Weatherwax looked at her sister witches. Gammer Brevis she couldn't stand. The old woman taught school on the other side of the mountain, and had a nasty habit of being reasonable when provoked. And old Mother Dismas was possibly the most useless sibyl in the history of oracular revelation. And Granny really couldn't be having it all with Nanny Ogg, who was her best friend.
What about young Magrat?
Said old Mother Dismas innocently.
Her patch runs right alongside Desiderata's. Maybe she could take on a bit extra.
Granny Weatherwax and Nanny Ogg exchanged glances.
She's gone funny in the head,
said Granny.
Now, come on, Esme,
said Nanny Ogg.
Well, I call it funny,
said Granny.
You can't tell me that saying all that stuff about relatives isn't going funny in the head.
She didn't say that,
said Nanny.
She said she wanted to relate to herself.
That's what I said,
said Granny Weatherwax.
I told her, Simplicity Garlic was your mother, Araminta Garlic was your granny. Yolande Garlic is your aunt. And you're me.
She sat back with the satisfied look of someone who has solved everything anyone could ever want to know about a personal identity crisis.
She wouldn't listen,
she added. Gammer Brevis wrinkled her forehead.
Magrat,
she said. She tried to get a mental picture of the Ramtop's youngest witch, and recalled, well, not a face, just a slightly watery-eyed expression of hopeless goodwill, wedged between a body like a maypole and hair like a haystack after a gale. I'm going to relate to that. A relentless doer of good works. A worrier. The kind of person who rescued small lost baby birds and cried when they died, which is the function kind old Mother Nature usually reserves for small lost baby birds.
Doesn't sound like her,
she said.
And she said she wanted to be more self-assertive,
said Granny.
Nothing wrong with being self-assertive,
said Nanny.
Self-asserting's what witching's all about.
I never said there was anything wrong with it,
said Granny.
I told her there was nothing wrong with it. You can be as self-assertive as you like, I said, just so long as you do what you're told. Rub this on it and it'll clear up in a week or two,
said old Mother Dismas. The other three witches watched her expectantly, in case there was going to be anything else. It became clear that there wasn't. All right.
And she's running. What's that she's running, Githa?
Said Granny.
Self-defense classes,
said Nanny.
But she's a witch,
Gammer Brevis pointed out.
I told her that,
said Granny Weatherwax, who had walked nightly without fear in the bandit-haunted forests of the mountains all her life in the certain knowledge that the darkness held nothing more terrible than she was.
She said that wasn't the point. Wasn't the point. That's what she said.
No one goes to them anyway,
said Nanny Og.
I thought she was going to get married to the king,
said Gammer Brevis.
Everyone did,
said Nanny.
But you know Magrat. She tends to be open to ideas. Now she says she refuses to be a sex object.
They all thought about this. Finally, Gammer Brevis said, slowly, in the manner of one surfacing from the depths of fascinated cogitation,
but she's never been a sex object.
I'm pleased to say I don't even know what a sex object is,
said Granny Weatherwax firmly.
I do,
said Nanny Og. Is anyone surprised by that? Oh boy. Wow. Of course she does. They looked at her.
Our Shane brought one home from foreign parts once.
They carried on looking at her.
It was brown and fat, and had beads on, and a face, and 2 holes for the string.
This didn't seem to avert their gaze.
Well, that's what he said it was,
said Nanny.
I think you're talking about a fertility idol,
said Gammer Brevis helpfully. Granny shook her head.
Doesn't sound much like Magrat to me,
she began.
You can't tell me that's worth tuppence,
said Old Mother Dismas, from whatever moment of time she was currently occupying. No one was ever quite sure which it was. It was an occupational hazard for those gifted with second sight. The human mind isn't really designed to be sent rocketing backward and forward along the great freeway of time, and can become, as it were, detached from its anchorage, seeing randomly into the past and the future, and only occasionally into the present. Old Mother Dismas was temporally unfocused. This meant that if you spoke to her in August, she was probably listening to you in March. It was best just to say something now and hope she'd pick it up next time her mind was passing through. Granny waved her hands experimentally in front of Old Mother Dismas's unseeing eyes.
She's gone again,
she said.
Well, if Magrat can't take it on, there's Millie Hopgood from over Slice way,
said Gammer Brevis.
She's a hard-working girl. Mind you, she's got a worse squint than Magrat. Nothing wrong with that. A squint looks good on a witch,
said Granny Weatherwax.
But you have to know how to use it,
said Nanny Ogg.
Old Gertie Simmons used to have a squint, and she was always putting the evil influence on the end of her own nose. We can't have people thinking that if you upset a witch, she curses and mutters and then her own nose drops off.
Wow. They all stared at the fire again.
I suppose Desiderata wouldn't have chosen her own successor,
said Gammer Brevis.
Can't go doing that,
said Granny Weatherwax.
That's not how we do things in these parts. Yes, but Desiderata didn't spend much time in these parts. It was the job. She was always going off to foreign parts. I can't be having with foreign parts,
said Granny Weatherwax.
You've been to Ankh-Morpork,
said Nanny mildly.
That's foreign.
No, it's not. It's just a long way off. That's not the same as foreign. Foreign's where they gabble at you in heathen lingo and eat foreign muck and worship, you know, objects,
said Granny Weatherwax, goodwill diplomat.
Foreign can be quite close, too, if you're not careful. Huh,
she added witheringly.
Yes, she could bring back just about anything from foreign parts.
She brought me back a nice blue and white plate once,
said Nanny Ogg.
That's a point,
said Gammer Brevis.
Someone had better go and see to her cottage. She had quite a lot of good stuff there. It'd be dreadful to think of some thief getting in there and having a rummage. Can't imagine any thief would want to break into a witch's.
Granny began, and then stopped abruptly.
Yes,
she said meekly.
Good idea. I'll see to it directly.
No, I'll see to it,
said Nanny Ogg, who'd also had time to work something out.
It's right on my way home. No problem.
No, you'll be wanting to get home early,
said Granny.
Don't bother yourself. It'll be no trouble.
Oh, it won't be any trouble at all, said Nanny.
You don't want to go tiring yourself out at your age,
said Granny Weatherwax. They glared at one another.
I really don't see that it matters,
said Gammer Brevis.
You might as well go together rather than fight about it. I'm a bit busy tomorrow,
said Granny.
How about after lunch?
Right,
said Nanny Og.
We'll meet at her cottage right after lunch.
We had one once, but the bait you unscrew fell off and got lost,
said Old Mother Dismas. I think that's probably a good place to stop. If everybody would like. Oh, well. Beat you to it. Steal my bookmark from the other book. That works out perfectly then. All right, well, that's the first, how many pages? 25-ish? 24 pages? It's the first 24 pages of Witches Abroad. The first 24 pages, Ben. Yeah, Nanny Og is great.
I do.
And then she starts describing something. Ugh. And holes for the string. Beads on it. Ah, boy. Gammer Brevis. I don't remember a Gammer Brevis. Lots of names in this one. Lots of old witches. All right, well, it's fun. It's fun getting back into the Discworld again, revisiting the witches. It's been a little while. I got to remind myself to go and listen to some parts of some of the previous Weird Sisters so I can remember everyone's voices. Granny's it's getting there. It's becoming familiar again. Nanny's, yeah, I need to remember Magrat's though. Yeah, definitely. All right, well, I don't have anyone on my list that's streaming right now, so I guess we'll just wrap things up. I should be back here on Friday. Assuming that we don't have like a conflicting house showing or anything like that. So, have a good evening, have a good rest of the week. Say hello to Mr. Sharky for me. And see you on Friday, hopefully. Alright. Good night. Bye.